It all started when I received an unexpected knock on my door one bright Saturday morning. Standing there in all her self-righteous glory was Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. She had that smug expression I had come to expect from her, the one that told me she thought she was above everyone else in the neighborhood. I barely had time to say good morning before she launched into her ridiculous demand. According to her, my beautiful 30-year-old oak tree was an eyesore and a hazard to the community. I almost laughed at the absurdity of her words. This tree wasn't just a part of my yard, it was a part of my home, my memories, and my childhood. I had grown up with it, climbing its sturdy branches as a kid and enjoying its shade every summer. And now Karen, the woman who had made HOA rules her personal weapon, wanted it gone just because she felt like it. I took a deep breath and asked her for a legitimate reason why the tree needed to be removed. She crossed her arms, clearly irritated that I wasn't blindly obeying her. "It's against HOA regulations," she snapped, her tone sharp and dismissive. But here's the thing. I had read the HOA rules cover to cover. Nowhere in the handbook did it say anything about removing healthy, well-maintained trees. I called her bluff, telling her to show me exactly where it was stated in the rules. For a moment she faltered, her confidence cracking like thin ice. But Karen was nothing if not persistent. Instead of backing down, she pulled out another ridiculous excuse, claiming that the tree blocked the community aesthetic and was dangerous in storms. I refused. Firmly but politely, I told her the tree was staying. Her face twisted into a scowl. I could practically see the steam rising from her ears as she realized I wasn't going to cave in like the other homeowners she had bullied into submission. Karen wasn't used to resistance. Most people in the neighborhood feared her wrath. They had seen what happened when she set her sights on someone. Mysterious fines would start appearing in their mailbox, anonymous complaints would suddenly flood in, and HOA meetings would conveniently turn into vote to destroy their property sessions. But I wasn't about to let her intimidate me. The moment I refused, I knew I had made an enemy. Karen's lips curled into a sickly sweet smile, but her eyes burned with thinly veiled hatred. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice dripping with malice. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stomped away. I had just declared war, and Karen was already plotting her first attack. The very next day, I received a formal violation notice from the HOA stating that my tree was in violation of neighborhood safety codes and needed to be removed within 2 weeks. I wasn't surprised. Karen had wasted no time in using her position of power to try and strong-arm me into submission. But what really got under my skin was the threat of a $500 per day fine if I didn't comply. This wasn't just about a tree anymore. This was a battle for control. Determined to fight back, I did what any reasonable person would do. I hired an arborist to inspect my tree. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I was going to come at her with cold, hard facts. The arborist's report came back exactly as I expected. The tree was in perfect health, with no signs of disease, structural instability, or hazards. Armed with this evidence, I marched straight to the next HOA meeting, ready to call Karen out on her nonsense. When I presented the official report, I expected the HOA board to acknowledge it and drop the issue, but Karen had already gotten to them. She smirked from her seat, watching as her minions parroted her words, insisting that even if the tree was healthy, it was still a concern. The board refused to budge, claiming that the report wasn't enough to override their decision. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my tree, it was about Karen flexing her power over the entire neighborhood. The next week, things escalated. Karen started weaponizing the HOA against me. Suddenly, I was hit with back-to-back violation notices, some of them for the most insane, nitpicky reasons imaginable. Grass half an inch too long, violation. Garbage cans not put away within 30 minutes of pickup, violation. Porch light too bright, another fine. It was obvious what was happening. Karen was retaliating. Then things got even worse. One night I heard strange noises outside my house. When I went to check, I saw a shadowy figure near my tree. By the time I got outside, they were gone, but the damage was done. The bark had been scratched and deep gouges had been made near the base. Someone had tried to sabotage it. My heart pounded with rage because I knew exactly who was behind this. Karen wasn't just trying to force me to remove the tree, she was trying to destroy it herself. Furious but determined, I knew I had to change tactics. If Karen wanted to make this personal, she had no idea what I was capable of. It was time to turn the tables and make this her problem instead. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was the deep gouges in my tree's bark, the deliberate damage someone had inflicted under the cover of darkness. My hands clenched into fists just thinking about it. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This was war. Someone had trespassed onto my property, had taken a blade to a living thing I had nurtured for decades, and I knew exactly who was behind it. Karen. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof. If she was willing to go this far, I had to be ready for whatever she planned next. The next morning, I drove straight to the nearest tech store and bought a set of high-quality security cameras. Not the cheap, obvious ones either. I got small, discreet cameras, ones that could be hidden in the tree branches and around my property without anyone noticing. If Karen or her goons tried anything again, I would catch them red-handed. But Karen wasn't about to sit around and wait. No, she was ramping up her attack. Just 2 days later, I received another notice from the HOA. This time, they were claiming my tree was infested with disease and had to be removed for the safety of the neighborhood. It was blatant nonsense. The arborist's report I had gotten clearly stated the tree was perfectly healthy, and they knew it. But Karen didn't care about truth. She cared about winning. I wasn't about to let her bulldoze over me, so I did something I knew would piss her off. I sent copies of the arborist's report to every single homeowner in the neighborhood. I printed out flyers and dropped them in mailboxes. I posted it in the community forum. I wanted everyone to know that the HOA was trying to force a homeowner to destroy their own property based on lies. The response was immediate. Neighbors started talking. Some of them were already sick of Karen's antics, and now they saw just how far she was willing to go. But Karen wasn't just a bully, she was a snake, and she knew how to slither out of trouble. She changed tactics again. That same week, I woke up to find a bright orange removal order sign staked into my front yard, right in front of my tree. It was meant to look official, complete with fake legal jargon that made it seem like I was violating some serious code. But when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't from the city. It wasn't even from the real HOA board. Karen had forged the whole thing. I took the sign down and stormed over to Karen's house. I wasn't playing games anymore. She opened the door with her usual smug expression, but before she could say a word, I held up the fake order. "Explain this," I said coldly. Her eyes flickered with something, panic maybe, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms with a fake look of innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You don't get to mess with my property and think I won't fight back." For a split second, I saw the mask slip. Karen wasn't used to people pushing back. She was used to intimidation working, to people just rolling over when she barked. But I wasn't like the others. I wasn't afraid of her. She narrowed her eyes. "You have no proof I did anything," she sneered. "That tree is coming down whether you like it or not." Then she slammed the door in my face. That's when I knew Karen had something bigger planned. The next evening, just after midnight, my security cameras caught movement near my yard. A shadowy figure crept onto my property carrying something bulky. I watched in real time on my phone as they poured something around the base of my tree. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a bat and sprinted outside. The figure bolted the second they saw me, but I was close enough to see a flash of blonde hair and a familiar shape. It was Karen. She had a canister of industrial-strength herbicide in her hand. My blood ran ice cold as I realized what she was doing. She was trying to poison my tree. "Hey!" I roared. She dropped the canister and ran, but I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. I had everything recorded. By morning, I had compiled the ultimate evidence file. I had the footage of Karen trespassing, vandalizing, and attempting to destroy my property. I had pictures of the damage she had done before, and I had the fake removal order as physical proof of her deception. Karen wanted a war. She was about to get one. I went straight to my lawyer. I wanted to sue her for trespassing, harassment, property damage, and criminal mischief. But I didn't stop there. I also filed a formal complaint with the HOA board exposing what she had done. I included every shred of evidence, every underhanded tactic she had used against me. She had broken multiple HOA rules and actual laws, and she was about to pay for it. But the real fun was just beginning. While I was preparing my case, I made sure everyone in the neighborhood knew exactly what Karen had done. I uploaded screenshots of the security footage to the community forum. I sent the evidence directly to the other HOA members, forcing them to acknowledge that their beloved Karen had gone rogue. The fallout was immediate and brutal. People were furious. The same homeowners who had once feared Karen were now demanding answers. They started calling for an emergency HOA meeting, something that hadn't happened in years. Karen, who had spent so long acting untouchable, suddenly found herself in the hot seat. But Karen wasn't done fighting yet. In one last desperate move, she tried to gaslight everyone. She went online, posting long dramatic messages claiming I had fabricated everything. She said the footage was edited, that the removal order was a misunderstanding, and that she was just trying to protect the neighborhood. It backfired spectacularly, because I wasn't the only one she had crossed. Other neighbors started coming forward, sharing their own stories of Karen's bullying tactics. She had fined people into bankruptcy. She had threatened elderly homeowners over minor rule infractions. She had forced people to repaint their homes for no reason. It was like the floodgates had burst open, and suddenly everyone saw Karen for what she truly was, a manipulative, power-hungry tyrant. By the time the HOA board finally convened for an emergency meeting, the writing was on the wall. Karen was losing control. But I wasn't done yet. I had one last move, one that would ensure Karen paid the price for everything she had done, and when I played that final card, it would be checkmate. Karen thought she could bully me into submission. She thought she could poison my tree, fabricate fake violations, and weaponize the HOA to crush me under endless fines. But she had badly miscalculated. By the time the emergency HOA meeting was scheduled, I had already lined up my next move, a devastating legal counterattack that would hit Karen so hard she wouldn't even see it coming. I spent the next few days working in the shadows, gathering everything I needed to destroy her. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to go on the offensive. Karen had waged a war against me using HOA technicalities and intimidation. Now I was about to use something much stronger, the law itself. First, I sat down with my lawyer and compiled a formal lawsuit against Karen. I was suing her for trespassing. Security footage showed her sneaking onto my property at night, attempting to poison my tree. Property damage. The arborist confirmed that someone had attempted to kill my tree with deep cuts and chemical exposure. Harassment. The fake violation letters, bogus fines, and intimidation tactics she had used to try to force me to comply. Forgery and fraud. The fake removal order she had illegally posted on my lawn, pretending it was an official HOA directive. Criminal mischief. For the illegal use of herbicides on private property, which was a felony offense in my state. But that was just the beginning. Next, I filed a complaint with the city's environmental department. Since she had tried to use industrial-strength herbicides, Karen had technically violated local environmental laws. The department took poisoning plants and trees very seriously, and I had all the proof they needed. If found guilty, she would be looking at massive fines and possible criminal charges. Then I dug deeper. If Karen was willing to forge official HOA documents, I had to wonder what else had she been up to. I started reaching out to other homeowners, asking if they had ever been unfairly fined, harassed, or forced into compliance by Karen, and that's when I uncovered something explosive. Karen had been running a financial scam right under everyone's noses. Multiple homeowners told me that when they had been fined by the HOA, Karen had personally collected the payments in cash or through unofficial transactions. Some of them had receipts with different signatures and accounts that didn't match official HOA records. Others had emails from Karen threatening additional fines if they didn't pay up immediately. Karen wasn't just a bully, she was a fraud. The money she had collected didn't go to the HOA, it went straight into her pockets. I knew exactly what to do with this information. The night of the HOA emergency meeting, the entire neighborhood showed up. It was the biggest turnout in years. Normally, these meetings were Karen's playground. She controlled them, twisting the rules to her advantage, drowning out any opposition. But this time, she wasn't in control. She knew it too. She sat at the front, her usual smug confidence replaced with thinly veiled anxiety. Her eyes darted around the room as people whispered about her. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. When the meeting started, Karen tried to take charge. She launched into her usual speech about protecting the neighborhood and enforcing the rules fairly. But this time, no one was buying it. I stood up, my legal folder in hand. The room fell dead silent. "Karen," I said, "I have proof that you have been abusing your position. And tonight, we're going to expose everything." Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth to interrupt, but I didn't let her. I pulled out the security footage, the photographs, the fabricated removal order, and the bogus violation letters. I laid out every single piece of evidence, one by one, while the entire room watched in stunned silence. And then I dropped the bombshell. "Karen has been stealing from this community." Gasps rippled through the room. The HOA board members who had once blindly backed Karen suddenly looked nervous. I explained the scam in full detail, showing the receipts, the fraudulent fines, the inconsistencies in payment records. I had witnesses stand up and confirm that Karen had personally collected their fines under false pretenses. Karen tried to interrupt, tried to dismiss it all as a misunderstanding. But I wasn't finished. I turned to the HOA board and handed them an official legal notice. "I'm suing Karen for harassment, trespassing, and fraud, and if the HOA doesn't take action against her, they'll be included in the lawsuit as well for knowingly allowing this corruption to continue." The silence was deafening. Karen's mask cracked completely. Her hands trembled as she gripped the table. For the first time since this battle began, she wasn't in control. The HOA board members looked at each other, their faces pale. They knew they were cornered. If they protected Karen, they'd be dragging themselves into legal trouble. One of the senior members, who had always seemed uncomfortable with Karen's tactics, finally spoke up. "Karen," she said, her voice tight with anger, "is this true?" Karen stammered, trying to spin excuses, but there was nothing left to say. Another board member stood up. "I move to remove Karen from the HOA immediately and open an official investigation into her actions." A second board member raised their hand. I second that motion. It happened faster than Karen could process. The board voted her out on the spot. The same woman who had ruled over the HOA like a dictator was now being dragged out of power in front of everyone. But the best part? Karen wasn't just losing her title, she was about to lose everything. Because the very next morning, the police showed up at her house. I had already sent the fraud and trespassing evidence to local authorities, and they took it very seriously. Karen was facing criminal charges, her reputation destroyed, her power gone. And the best part? My tree was still standing, but I wasn't done yet. I had one final move to make. A move that would ensure Karen would never mess with anyone again. And when I played that card, it would be game over. The night after the HOA meeting, Karen's world began to collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. She had spent years bullying, scheming, and manipulating her way to the top of the HOA, treating the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. But now, the power was gone. The fear she once commanded had turned into pure, unfiltered rage from the people she had tormented. The first major blow came the next morning. At exactly 8 a.m., 2 uniformed police officers pulled up in front of Karen's house. Word spread like wildfire through the community. Neighbors peered through their curtains, some even stepping onto their porches to watch the show unfold. Karen, dressed in her usual pristine pantsuit, as if she had woken up thinking she could still run the HOA, stormed onto her porch, arms crossed, face red with fury. She had always lived under the illusion that rules didn't apply to her, that she was above consequences. But as soon as one of the officers handed her an official court summons, her expression shifted. Her hands trembled. Her smirk faltered. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. "This is a joke," she scoffed, though her voice lacked its usual venom. "I did nothing wrong." The officers didn't care. They calmly explained that she was being investigated for trespassing, harassment, property damage, and potential financial fraud. The word fraud made Karen's entire body stiffen. That was the word that could ruin her. The fake fines, the missing money, the fabricated violation notices, everything was coming back to haunt her. As the police left, Karen whirled around, only to see that her nightmare was far from over. A group of homeowners had gathered, whispering among themselves, their gazes fixed on her with pure disgust. And then it happened. One voice rang out, loud, clear, merciless. "We want our money back, Karen." She froze. A second voice joined in. "Where's all the money you stole?" A third. "You scammed all of us and now you're trying to play the victim." Karen tried to ignore them, tried to march back into her house like she still had control over the situation, but the people she had oppressed were no longer afraid of her. Someone threw an HOA violation notice onto her lawn, a notice that she had once issued, then another and another. Soon her entire front yard was littered with fines, notices, and fake complaints she had handed out over the years. It was a silent rebellion, a reminder that the power she had once wielded had turned against her. But the true coup de grace was still coming. While Karen was busy fending off the angry neighborhood, the HOA board was digging into her past financial records. Now that she was out, the remaining board members, who had once been too scared to question her leadership, were uncovering a nightmare. The first major discovery? Karen had embezzled thousands of dollars from the HOA's reserve funds. She had funneled money into maintenance projects that didn't exist. Several payments had been redirected to a personal account under her name. Even worse, she had forced homeowners to pay fines that were never officially recorded, and since they had paid in cash or through unofficial means, the money was untraceable. It was gone. But the most damning piece of evidence? Karen had used HOA funds to renovate her own home, new appliances, a brand new deck, even landscaping work. All of it was paid for using money that was supposed to be for community improvements. The HOA board was livid. The board wasted no time calling another meeting. But this time, it wasn't just for HOA members. They invited the entire neighborhood. They wanted everyone to know exactly what Karen had done. That night, Karen tried to hide. She refused to show up, locking herself inside her house like a cornered rat. But hiding wouldn't save her, because the HOA board was ready to burn her legacy to the ground. In front of a packed crowd, the board laid out every single violation she had committed. They displayed documents, bank statements, emails, even proof of her personal purchases made with HOA money. The audience reaction was brutal. Gasps, murmurs, outright shouts of anger. Karen wasn't just a controlling HOA tyrant, she was a criminal. And then, the final nail in the coffin, they announced a community vote to decide her fate. Effective immediately, one board member announced, voice shaking with anger, "We are proposing a permanent ban on Karen holding any position within this HOA, ever." A lifetime ban. Karen wasn't just losing control, she wasn't just being fired, she was being erased. The vote wasn't even close. An overwhelming majority of homeowners raised their hands in agreement. Karen was officially blacklisted. By the time Karen finally stepped outside again, she was no longer the untouchable dictator she had once been. She was a pariah. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Lawyers, investigators, and local authorities were all coming for her. The lawsuits were piling up. My own personal lawsuit against her for trespassing and property damage, it was moving forward. And thanks to the evidence I had, I was winning. But the worst part for Karen? The HOA was now suing her too. They demanded full repayment of the stolen funds, damages for fraud, and legal penalties for financial misconduct. And since she had already been exposed, there was no escaping it. Her own former allies, the HOA board members she had manipulated, were now her enemies. Karen tried to fight back. She tried to plead, to threaten, to claim innocence. But nobody cared anymore. The court cases dragged her through the mud. She lost. Badly. She was forced to sell her house just to cover the legal fees and restitution payments. She was drowning in debt. Her reputation destroyed. The once feared HOA tyrant was now a disgraced fraudster with nothing left. And my tree? It was still standing. Not just standing, thriving. In fact, after everything, the new HOA board, now free from Karen's rule, approved a new policy, protecting all mature trees in the neighborhood. Karen had spent years trying to destroy my tree, but in the end, she was the one who was uprooted. Karen's fall from power had been spectacular, but I wasn't done yet. The lawsuits, the financial ruin, and the HOA turning against her were just the beginning of her suffering. The neighborhood had been living under her thumb for years, and now that she was powerless, people weren't about to just let her fade into the background. They wanted revenge. And oh, did they get it. The first wave of karma came in the form of relentless community humiliation. Karen couldn't step outside her house without being met with whispers, glares, and the occasional sarcastic greeting. "Hey, Karen, you gonna find me for my flowers being too bright?" "Careful, Karen, don't step on the grass. Wouldn't want to violate one of your fake HOA rules." But the real fun began when the homeowner started fixing everything she had ruined, the people she had forced to repaint their homes. They repainted them back to their original colors. Some even went with the most obnoxious shades possible just to spite her. The neighbors she had fined for unapproved decorations. They went all out. Lawn flamingos, neon lights, oversized inflatables, and a ridiculous amount of wind chimes filled the neighborhood. And the best part? They started planting trees, a lot of trees. Karen had fought so hard to get rid of mine, so as an act of rebellion, everyone started planting trees on their properties. Every day, another neighbor put up a new tree: oak, maple, pine, cherry blossom. By the end of the month, the community had completely transformed into a lush green paradise. Karen had wanted my tree gone, and instead she got an entire forest. Despite the public shaming, Karen refused to leave. She held onto her house like a sinking ship, desperately hoping to wait out the storm. But there was just one problem. She couldn't afford it anymore. With mounting legal fees, the HOA suing her, and her fraud exposed, Karen's finances were in complete shambles. She had been living off stolen money for years, and now that her little scam had collapsed, she had nothing left. Soon the bank started circling. With no income and massive debts, she missed her mortgage payments. Then the official foreclosure notice arrived. Karen was being forced out of the neighborhood she had once controlled. And the best part, the HOA, which had once been her weapon of oppression, was now the very thing pushing her out. Since she had been removed from power and permanently banned from holding an HOA position, she had no allies left. But I wasn't done yet. No, I had one final move. A way to make sure Karen never forgot the hell she put me through. I did a little digging into the property records and discovered something beautiful. Karen's house? It was about to go up for auction. And who do you think showed up to bid? Mr. I wasn't the only one either. Several other neighbors who had suffered under Karen also pitched in, just to make sure that the house went to someone who would never let her return. We outbid every other buyer, and in the end, we won. I now owned Karen's house, the same house from which she had ruled over the neighborhood like a dictator, the same house where she had orchestrated her HOA scams, and just to twist the knife a little deeper, I made some modifications. The first thing I did was bulldoze the entire yard. Remember how Karen had fought tooth and nail to get rid of my tree? Well, I had a special surprise for her. I had the biggest, most massive oak tree I could find, transplanted directly into the front yard of her old property, right in the middle. And I put up a plaque next to it, a plaque that read, "In loving memory of Karen's tyranny, may this tree stand stronger than her HOA rules." It became a neighborhood landmark. People loved it. Every time a new neighbor moved in, someone would explain the story of how Karen tried to destroy a tree and ended up losing everything instead. The day Karen came back to grab the last of her belongings was glorious. She pulled up to her old house, saw the massive tree standing tall in what used to be her front yard, and just lost it. She screamed in the street, pointing at the tree, shaking with rage. "You did this on purpose," she shrieked. I just smiled. Yep. She had nothing left. No house, no power, no money. And she had to watch as the very neighborhood she had tried to control celebrated her downfall. As she drove away for the last time, a few neighbors waved her off with sarcastic goodbyes. Don't let the HOA fines hit you on the way out. Enjoy your new life outside the neighborhood, Karen. And just like that, she was gone. With Karen finally out of our lives, the neighborhood flourished. The new HOA leadership was actually fair, and people were finally free to enjoy their homes without the constant threat of Karen's ridiculous fines. My tree, still standing, still thriving. In fact, it became the inspiration for the new HOA rules, a new guideline that protected all mature trees in the neighborhood. Karen had tried to wipe my tree off the map, and instead it became a permanent part of our community's legacy. And her house. I rented it out to a lovely family who coincidentally adored trees. They even planted another one in the backyard. If you try to take down someone else's tree, you might just end up losing everything instead. And in the end, nature always wins.